So, as I understand, you started this project because you had a personal interest in the subject. Is that the case?
Yeah, I grew up in Philadelphia, and I think due to the nature of the incident and how traumatic and tragic it was for the whole city, but also due to the fact that I was 11, so I was roughly the age of some of the children that died in the house, and I was also at that age where you're really sort of susceptible to those events that happen outside. It was one of the first events that I remember that sort of came from the news that really impacted my feeling of well-being, if you will, my feeling of safety. It really frightened me as another child living in that city, and I think it just impacted me. I didn't have the sort of ways that adults have to frame these things and understand them better. To me, it was just frightening. Like, could this happen to me? Scary. And then when I moved away, not that long after, you start to talk to people your age and peers, and you realize this thing that affected you was largely unknown to other people my age. And I've talked to, over the years, a lot of people across the country, and it's just not that well known among Americans. So I think that sort of added to it for me. And then ultimately, I went to film school and studied documentary. And in film school, you learn a really specific way to sort of approach these things and process and a rubric for what makes a good film. So it was just sort of this trajectory where it was like, it bothered me as a kid, it bothered me more as a young adult that no one knew about it. And then as a slightly older young adult, I sort of finally had the tools and the methods to sort of approach it through going to film school. And then beyond that, it still took a long time, and I needed an institutional partner in GW, George Washington University, and then ultimately working with Nels and making the decision to cut this type of archival film.
I personally am fascinated by the way you have chosen to use only archival footage in a story that could be told in a variety of ways. How did you make that decision? Was that something that Nels was involved with, or?
Yeah, in fact, Nels was so important to that decision that I like to let him go first on this one.
When Jason brought the film to me, usually as an editor, we come on close to the end of production, but Jason had all this footage that he'd been collecting for years and years, and several interviews, contemporary interviews with the subjects. Bertie, Michael Moses Ward was one of them. James Bergheyer, the police officer at the end, was one of them. Who were the other ones?
Ramona.
Yeah, Ramona. And I watched these interviews, and what struck me about them is something that maybe strikes me about this whole subject, is that I don't think anybody understands what happened now any better than they did at the time of the incident. And so these interviews were people talking about this now, but almost without much benefit of hindsight. People didn't have a lot more to say about this. So then when I watched the commission footage, I saw, boy, it was surprisingly cinematic with great lighting and great close-ups and, people under pressure to answer questions.
Why did they have close-ups of the gavel? Did you put those in?
Close-ups
Of the gavel?
No, they did a great job producing this. They had cameras lined up for everything, and, they had a whole multi-camera suite. I'm sure directors... it went on for 20 days or so, the commission. So we had lots of footage of all sorts.
I got the sense that the actual production people that worked on it kind of had a sense of the moment, that these are guys that do a lot of sort of, newsy, public access-y type stuff. And here was this time where it was, I think they sensed it in the same way and realized it was time to step up to the plate and bring their A game, and saw it as sort of a creative opportunity, or almost a historic creative opportunity. Yeah. That's the sense.
And then we picked that up, 25 years later, and said, we can take this, what they've made, and use this footage, the commission footage, to, give the context and to keep us in that time period. And I suggested that to Jason, and luckily we agreed that we thought it was something that we would give a shot. We thought it was kind of risky, and we said, let's try it. I mean, I think in some ways it puts you into that moment in 1985, but then in other ways it allows you to draw your own conclusions from what's going on. I think if we had contemporary interviews in this, it would be certainly about the story that occurred there. But this way you can see it as what happened on Osage Avenue in 1985, or you can see it as a parable for a lot of other things.
A lot of it hinged around an archive that was at Temple University in Philadelphia. And what had happened was the commission, not everything you see, but a large portion, the commission, as they were doing their work, they went to the news stations and they asked for the live tapes as evidence. And then all of that became part of this sort of cache of stuff that included the Well, it's a little more complicated than that, but it included the transcripts and the actual hearing tapes and these news tapes that were collected. And they were all ceded to a university where they were held in the library, but they were sort of held under lock and key for a lot of years, and you sort of look but not touch, and they were sort of behind glass. And it took a large part of the battle, and I was getting things from other sources, and people were giving me tapes and sort of, minor stuff. But a lot of the time, making the film had to do with negotiating the big cache of footage out from the archive that was rather protective of it and wanted to make sure that they didn't release it in a way that would cause legal trouble or, I think in a broader sense, cause the story to be told in a not careful way.
Well, that's part of archives' nature, is
Agreed,
to keep things
yeah.
so that people...
Well, and I should say, too, what actually broke that logjam was going to another university and joining the faculty of the George Washington University that was very, very supportive in terms of getting the access and negotiating those deals. And it's sort of an interesting story to me in terms of institutional support, but also, when I was on the outside trying to get this access, I really resented that. And, why do I need this sort of stamp of approval to make this film? But then once you sort of get on the inside and you do the work to sort of build a career and build a reputation, you sort of, I'm actually a different person than I was when I was first trying to access. And then you think, well, maybe there's something to jumping through those hoops and becoming sort of, making your bones, if you will, and getting that support that it forces you to develop in a certain way and gain the support and sort of tell the story in a responsible way.